The Giants have traded Mauricio Dubón to the Houston Astros in exchange for a minor league catcher. Who did they get in return? What is he about? And why did the Giants make this move? We'll talk about all of that next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes, usually Monday through Friday, but in this case, an emergency episode on Saturday as well, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on this emergency bonus content show, it's going to be a little shorter than normal, but an instant reaction, or at least the day of reaction, to Mauricio Dubón being traded to the Houston Astros today in exchange for Michael Papierski, a catcher who was in the Astros AAA affiliate for all of this season, and I think some of last year as well. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on Papierski in a minute, but first, about Dubón, about why they made this move. Well, we've been talking about how they have a roster crunch upcoming. They had bought themselves some time with both Tyler Beede and Mauricio Dubón, given in the beginning of the year, rosters were expanded. They were allowed to have 28 players. It was going to come down to 26 in the beginning of May. That happened. They also had a lot of injuries, and so they were able to keep some guys who were on the fringes of their roster. Tyler Beede was the first casualty as he was designated for assignment about a week ago, and then today they trade Dubón. So a lot of this has to do with Longoria just came back, and Tommy La Stella is due back immediately. I mean, I say due back immediately. I don't know exactly when he's going to come back, but he's been playing in AAA. Wouldn't shock me if he comes back tomorrow. Like, that's how close La Stella appears to be. Now, it is important for me to point out, because I've been seeing a ton of this. People are saying, I prefer Dubón to La Stella. Two things. Number one, I'm going to talk about why I think that's crazy is a bit of a strong word, but the data doesn't really back that up. And okay, number two, they don't fill the same role. That's the thing. Dubón was never like a starting player at second base against right-handed pitching. That is never the role he filled. It was never going to be the role he was going to fill. Dubón's role was to start against left-handed pitching. When he was in the major leagues, and let's keep in mind, he spent a lot of last year in the minor leagues. When he was in the major leagues, what he did was he started when they faced a lefty. Sometimes he started in center field. Sometimes he started, I think he made maybe one start at second base this year. He started once at third base. He could fill in at shortstop. But it was always against left-handed pitching unless they just really wanted to give him an extra shot or they wanted to give somebody a day off like Crawford. I mean, Dubón really was the guy who started typically immediately after Brandon Crawford at the shortstop position. But the numbers, okay, so for his major league career, which started in 2019, I think he had one plate appearance with the Brewers before he was traded to the Giants. But overall, he's got an 88 weighted runs created plus, so slightly below league average offense. I mean, that's not so much slightly. It's below league average offense, 258 average, 301 on base, 395 slugging. But remember that number, 88 weighted runs created plus overall. However, he is a guy who has had strong platoon splits. Against left-handed pitching in his career, he's hit 298 with a 341 on base and 503 slugging. Now that's more like it. Those are robust numbers. So that's a 126 weighted runs created plus. And you might be deducing that if you put up monster numbers like that against left-handed pitching and your overall numbers are below league average, that means you really struggled against right-handed pitching. And that's what we've seen. So let's also keep in mind Dubón's strikeout rate against lefties was 17%. So if we look against righties, okay, a lot of guys do have big differences between lefties and righties in terms of the strikeout rate, but that hasn't really been the case with him. It's 20% against righties. However, a 69 weighted runs created plus, 238 average, 281 on base, 341 slugging. So that is like pretty much the inverse of what Tommy La Stella's role on the roster. So it is really not fair to compare those two. And if you are going to compare them, I mean, I'm just going to have to point out what the numbers are. So if you want to say Mauricio Dubón should take La Stella's role, you're saying that 69 weighted runs created plus is what the Giants should be throwing out there at the second base position, essentially, because that's where La Stella is mostly going to play. It's where he played last year. One thing I want to point out about La Stella, what we saw last year is not the best of Tommy La Stella. He had a down season by his standards. And so I guess if you just look at last year and say, well, that wasn't that interesting or exciting, I would agree with you, but that's not what I expect moving forward from Tommy La Stella. So from La Stella, let's talk about the numbers against right-handed pitching. Remember the 69 weighted runs created plus for Dubón against righties. Well, La Stella's is 125 against righties, which is essentially what Dubón has done against lefties when we give him all this credit for doing well against lefties. That's what La Stella has done against righties, hitting 286, 352 on base, and 483 slugging, with a strikeout rate of 8.4% and a walk rate of 8.6%. And this is since 2019, by the way. So I looked at 2019 because that's when Dubón broke into the league. So looking at both of them since that year. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just no contest. A 69 weighted runs created plus versus 125 against right-handed pitching. So anyway, Dubón had value. It was just in the weak side of a platoon. And I want to point out, again, I keep seeing the comments made like he was just starting to do well and even find his stride. Well, guess what? That corresponded with the fact that the Giants faced a string of left-handed starting pitchers for the first time in a long time, even all season. They didn't face hardly any lefties to start the year, but then they did in that series against the Cardinals and the Rockies. They saw some lefties, and Dubón did well in those starts. And so it was just a continuation of something he's always been able to do, which is hit lefties. And then as soon as there were righties out there, I think he made one start and he did not get on base, I believe. And then he hasn't been starting since because they haven't been facing lefties again. So it's not right to say, oh, I prefer him to La Stella. To me, it's just it's a apples and oranges comparison. So it could be fair to say you prefer Dubón to Estrada, but maybe you don't, because that's more of the question. Both Estrada and Dubón were out of minor league options, and so they couldn't send either one of them down. They had to be on the major league roster, and they just simply ran out of room with guys coming back and with other players past him on the depth chart. Like, clearly they valued Estrada more than Dubón. Just simply look at the playing time. Estrada has played so much more than Mauricio Dubón this year. So clearly Estrada was ahead of him on the depth chart. And that's the thing. Dubón has value in that role. And I also think I am highly complimentary of Mauricio Dubón's defense. I think he plays a good defensive center field, a good defensive second base. He can certainly pass at shortstop. He can play third, and he can hit lefties, and there's value in that. And the Houston Astros felt so as well. But he probably fits their roster a little bit better. And for the Giants, it is very interesting that they went out and acquired a catcher in this deal. Michael Papierski is not on the 40-man roster, but he spent 2021 in AAA for the Houston Astros organization, where he had a 379 on base percentage. And he's been in AAA this year as well, and he's got a 324 on base percentage, despite a 211 average. So I think a lot of people look at the batting average and say, that's bad. What I do is I look at the average and I say, okay, whatever. And then I look at the on-base percentage and say, wow, he must really have good plate discipline because he gets on base at a good rate despite a not so impressive batting average. And honestly, batting average doesn't matter that much if you're walking and if you can hit for some power. The, quote, issue is that as of yet, Papierski hasn't really hit for power, but the Giants have... that was kind of Lamont Wade Jr.'s question mark as well. It was like he gets on base a lot. He doesn't strike out. And the question is, will he hit for power? He came to the Giants and immediately started hitting for power. I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but it has happened in the past. And this year, in 108 plate appearances for AAA Sugarland for the Astros organization, Papierski had 14 walks and 9 strikeouts. And every single stop he's made in the minors, he's had between a 13 and 19% walk rate. League average in the major leagues is like 8.7%. So clearly an above average idea of the strike zone and just kind of fits what the Giants want out of their offensive players. He's a catcher. I hope I said that already. Regarded as a good defensive catcher, a good framer, a good leader of pitchers. Pitchers love throwing to him. Known as a good clubhouse guy, great clubhouse guy, apparently. And he's a switch hitter, and he gets on base and controls the zone. So there's so many different angles to take with this, and part of this affects and should make us think a little bit about the catcher position at the major league level, because they didn't just acquire Papierski to have him be, when I say upper minors depth, that doesn't just mean he's going to sit in AAA all year and they never really have major league plans for him. For me, this is the closest thing they have now to Joey Bart insurance, and it could signify that they option Joey Bart at some point and give Papierski a look, and it could signify the possibility of a Joey Bart trade at some point as well. So I'm not calling that. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but it is interesting that when they finally made the move to trade Dubón, they do get Papierski. I don't think this is like something they just thought of overnight. In fact, the Astros general manager, James Click, said that the Giants have been after Papierski, quote, for a while. And so he's someone they wanted to get their hitting coach's hands on and to stick him in AAA and see if they can make some tweaks. And probably at some point we're going to see him at the major league level in 2022. The thing is, if Bart takes off and Casali keeps doing his job, then maybe not. But maybe they don't necessarily think that Joey Bart's swing and miss issues are going to self-correct. He had a nice game today. But anyway, there's a lot of different angles we can look at when we talk about this. It also means, well, another move was that they called up Donovan Walton, who they just had acquired from the Seattle Mariners a few days ago, and they had traded Prelander Berroa to the Seattle Mariners. I'm always feeling like I need to say that with more of an accent, but it's a tough one and tough name to pronounce. But they trade him to the Mariners. He was doing well. It wasn't like just some off the scrap heap kind of move. It was a legitimate prospect for prospect move. And Grant Brisbee kind of called this and said, this trade is different. This minor trade is different, and he's going to have a role. And sure enough, as soon as Dubón comes off the roster today, because of the trade, they call up Donovan Walton, and he's in the starting lineup. And he fits the team a little bit better as a left-handed hitter. He is more comparable to La Stella, and I think he does represent La Stella insurance far more than Dubón ever did. And so with La Stella coming back, I wouldn't be surprised if they option Donovan Walton. And that's an important point to all this, is that Walton is optionable, and they just really value that flexibility. It's not great when you have several guys on your roster who are kind of fringy on your roster already, and you can't send them down. And especially when you need space, it often creates the incentive to make a trade. And that's what we saw here today. So, I mean, I don't think I even mentioned this, but Mauricio Dubón is a great kid. And I think a lot of people liked him a lot. And so I understand that it hurts to lose a player that you liked, but there were a lot of reasons for this, and it's a good place for him to go in Houston. That team is really good, and he probably has a better path to playing time. They're not trading for him if they don't think he can really stick on their roster, because just like the Giants couldn't option him, the Astros won't be able to option him either. So we're probably going to see Mauricio Dubón fill a role on the Astros team, and they go to the playoffs every year. They're looking great this year as well, so it's a good opportunity for him, a good place to land for him. He grew up a Giants fan. I mean, once he moved to Sacramento, Mauricio Dubón was a Giants fan, and so fan favorite in a lot of ways, made some boneheaded base running mistakes over the years, but overall just an easy guy to root for. I always rooted for him and backed him up and always talked about how he was good against lefties and a good defender. And it's a prospect for, well, he's not really a prospect, but it's just a baseball trade and a needs-based trade. And I think that for both teams, it made sense. And that's what I have to say on it for now in this abbreviated edition of the podcast. So we'll have more reaction to this on Monday and any other roster moves that get made between now and then. They actually made a trade while we were starting to record this, so we'll talk about that as well on Monday. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. So we'll talk to you on Monday. Thanks again for listening today. And as always, stay Locked On Giants.